As you can see, there were lots of issues raised during plenary yesterday at the National Assembly. I mean, it's usually a quiet time at the National Assembly during this period of the year, but because of the budget, it was quite a busy day. In fact, the lawmakers had sort of cut short their Christmas break to deliberate on this. So we'll take a look at all of the issues that have been raised. Okay, and we're joined, as you have seen, by Dr. Boniface Chizia, who is an economist, joins us live from Asaba in Delta State, virtually. Good morning, Dr. Chizia. It's good to have you. And, well, do I say happy holidays to you?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes.
Right. It's good to have you. And I'll start off from what the representative spoke about, Representative Onofiok Luke. And he was referring to the finance bill, saying that it doesn't really address the yearnings of Nigerians. And, you know, this administration came up with the culture of having a finance bill with the budget. And if we could maybe look back, before we talk about even the 2023 budget, which was just passed, if you look at the finance bill as it comes with the budget, would you say it has, to a large extent, or to whichever extent you see, addressed the yearnings of Nigerians such that when they look at the budget, they sort of see their names on it? It sort of has a direct impact on their lives.
Well, the finance bill itself is not supposed to. The finance bill is an aid, you know, to the budget itself. What it does, in fact, is to take some of the charges and so on that will go, particularly taxation, that goes into the budget, and then breaks it down and do some improvements and so on and so forth. So to that extent, it doesn't stand on its own. So it's an aid to the budget. And so for us, I think that we economists, we see it as an innovation, which is a worthy innovation, and we are trying to bring ourselves up to speed, and that's exactly what we've done. So we had the finance bill, it's an innovation, and it helps essentially in trying to, one of the challenges we have is revenue. You know, we don't have revenue within the system, so that's the challenge you have. And so the race has been, you know, for us to see, you know, to what extent we are able to augment the revenue that flows into the treasury. And you know, in fact, the oil that is the goose that lays the golden egg itself. You know what, you know yourself as well as I do, what sort of the fortune it has had over this period. You know, it's a mixed fortune with the thefts and so on and so forth. So I think that that's exactly what the finance bill does. So it's not a standalone. It's not something you want to take and begin to discuss. You couldn't. So in the areas of tariffs and so on, taxations and so on, where the Ministry of Finance needs some approvals and so on, so they put it through the finance bill, and that's what it does. So it's a bill that helps to finance the budget.
And I think that's maybe the point that the representative was trying to make, that with the introduction, maybe for this one, but over time now, with the introduction of the finance bill, have we been able to prop up our revenues? Because, I mean, the finance minister has even said, well, we don't have a borrowing problem. What we have is a revenue problem. So one would ask naturally that, so what has the finance bill been able to achieve in terms of helping us raise that much needed revenue? We'll talk about the ways and means, which is also a big one, but still on that point, so perhaps Nigerians can understand how effective or maybe otherwise the finance bill has been over the years.
Well, I think the first measures it took when it was introduced was to increase the VAT rate. You know, we had some controversies about it, you know, VAT is a consumption tax. And so the first thing that, when it was introduced, was to increase the VAT rates, which we had in the country, from number 5 to 7.5%. To be able to implement that, they didn't want to just push it to the budget. That was brought out as a means to increase the revenue that flows to the treasury. And so you had the VAT. So, of course, once the bill has been approved, now what it does, in fact, is to empower the authorities, you know, to go out and implement and make sure that nobody takes them to court and so on. And so, but beyond that, like in most things, you know, what is going to be important is how it is implemented. And to what extent, you know, have you allowed leakages, you know, to impact on what, you know, the monies that should accrue from that source. So that immediately comes to mind. And, you know, there was some was 5%, 7.5%, and so on. So that was pushed to the finance bill. But I expect also that some aspects of tariffs customs and so on, and where they want to tinker with it, would have to go through the finance bill. So that explicitly, it makes it clear that an approval has been received. Now, if you just push it through the budget and you just increase it, well, and it's not discussed, and then somebody can go to court and take government to court and say, you are doing this without authorization. So I think that's the point about the finance bill, and that's exactly what it has done, and I think that is what it achieved. Beyond giving the approval for us to implement, and like I said earlier on, targeted at getting augmenting the revenue that goes into the treasury, beyond having that approval, now after that, it depends on what we do with it. So if we go and we don't implement it appropriately and implement it in a way that will allow leakages, then it will not have the sort of impact that we would expect that it will have. Now, if you're talking of revenue, it's not going to have the sort of direct impact that people will begin to see on the street. So if we just augment revenue and reduce the deficit, and then maybe reduce borrowing and so on and so forth, and then maybe impact will come to ways and means,
right?
Impact on the liquidity within the system.
All right, so let's talk about this budget now and get your immediate reactions, really, because for a lot of Nigerians, all they see trillions, and they just wonder, I mean, how do we approach this? Especially when you look at last year's budget, or at least this year's budget, 2022, 17 trillion. And you're looking at this budget called, what? Budget of Fiscal Consolidation and Transition. And you see 21 trillion naira. So when you look at this budget, and the breakdown includes capital expenditure of 5.99 trillion, recurrent is 8.3 trillion, debt servicing 6.6 trillion. That's also another issue we'll speak to. Of course, statutory transfer is just less than 1 trillion. So when you see this budget, the oil benchmark is at $75, an increase from $70. What do you see as an economist?
Well, what I see looking at the budget is that, I think first of all, you have to give kudos, to this is a lame duck government. It might call it, speak the truth. So this is a lame duck government. In most regime by this time, people are going to be consumed, with politics. So I think that is, I will give we'll doff our hats to the president, that he's not allowed the sanctions of elections, to affect what he's doing. So for them to be doing this and even asking for supplementary budget at this point in time, when, by June 29th, there's no more on seat. I think that is commendable. Looking at the budget, the first thing that you say to yourself, one is that one of the things that this regime has achieved is restoring the budget cycle, to the full calendar year. So it starts at January and it finishes by December. And the struggle they're trying to keep this. And so the budget is nothing more. It's an intention of expenditure. So if you have recurrent expenditure, if you don't have it, then you can't pay salaries. So those are like, you don't add much, what you do, but at least they could give us the peace. If you don't pay salaries, then you have a riot on your hands. And people don't have money to take care of themselves, then you don't expect them to have any productivity at work. And so you do that. But what really would impact, what would really affect us, bring about the sort of development we are looking for is capital expenditure. And it depends on where it is and how it's spent. And so, but of course, there's an extent to which you can increase capital expenditure. It's not marginally increased. But part of it is, and for a long time, we're talking about trying to balance the budget itself, to reduce, see if we can have capital expenditure, take a lion's share of the budget. Not we've been able to achieve that.
Well, the point you made about the January to December budget cycle, for 2 years now, we've seen an extension of the budget implementation, especially the capital component, beyond December. For this year now, it's been extended to March. For the previous year, we saw an extension as well. So is it still right, really, to say we still have a January to December budget cycle when, in fact, it's been extended beyond December, not once, not twice?
Yeah, obviously, I think that we don't learn fast. We try to talk, we say these things, but they don't get it. What we're doing is we have a ruling budgeting system. There was a time we had that in this country. You have a 3-year budget system. And then all these extensions and so on will not be there. You know, it should be a relic of the past. And so what you don't spend, you just simply roll over. You know, so, but like we already said, each time you come and then you say, oh, look, we're trying to keep this cycle January to December, and then you make nonsense of it, because then you're not asking for supplementary budget, you're asking for extension, as we've been told now. It's necessary to March 31st. And so it's still, it makes a mockery of this claim that we are still maintaining the budget cycle of January to December. What we should do is have a 3-year rolling budgeting system, whereby in 1 year, the first year, second year takes changes and things that you're not able to implement the second, first year. You go to the second year. Particularly when you have capital expenditure, you cannot. It's very difficult to predict, you know, how you're going to get them implemented. And sometimes it's very difficult for you to have capital expenditures that you can completely implement within 1 year. Maybe, you know, try as best as you can. We'll have issues with approval, we'll have issues with releases, and so on and so forth. So we have to. Someday we will get there. But I think that what really we should do is have a 3-year rolling plan, and so that all these issues will be cleared off the table.
Now, Dr. Chizia, I hope that the Ways and Means request does not make a mockery of the, you know, expenditure of government as the budget cycle extension does, which is what I want you to speak to. You know, this was what was responsible for what would have been a rowdy session at the Senate yesterday over a certain senator's opposition to the Ways and Means request, which will now bring the government's loan from the CBN to about 23.7 trillion naira. What's the implication of this, you know, on the Appropriation Act itself? Is it a loan by itself, or it's an addition that has extended the government expenditure beyond what was budgeted for 2022? Now, I'd also like you to speak to the finance bill, which has myriad of implications, one of which is, although it has been passed, but for whatever it is worth, Nigerians will now have to pay more for calls, data, and, you know, apart from the finance bill, Nigerians are overburdened with, you know, whether it's the personal income tax, road tax, there's VAT, there are other, you know, charges on Nigerians, you know, expenditure, purchasing power beyond taxes that they have to pay. I'd also like you to talk about that, but start with the Ways and Means requests, you know, that is causing some form of disaffection among senators.
Well, okay. I don't know. Have I lost my? Well, I think that I hope you are still seeing me. Are you still seeing me? Hello.
Go ahead, Dr. Chizia. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I think that the Ways and Means request. I think that what to say there is that it's not something I had some issues like, you know, somebody asking for. It's not a law and so on and so forth, but it's not a law. You don't need a law for Ways and Means. It's an accommodation by the central bank. And so what the central bank does is the central bank gives a check to the government, and government begins to spend. So it's a printing of currency. That's essentially what it is. And what they've asked for, what government is trying to do is like something that we've been delinquent in doing over the years. We are trying to see if we can correct it. So you can see it goes back to so many years. It's not something that happened recently. It's not a fresh loan they are asking for, but this is an accommodation. The government is having some issues with paying salaries and so on. A stock in some respect, and central bank issues a check. And this check is not backed with activity. And what this check does essentially is that it injects liquidity into the system. It enables the government to spend money. It enables the government to pay salaries. But then this money should not be injected that way, because the money, we should have to earn the money we spend. So that's why we'll have a deficit in the budget. Then we'll have to go back and try and deliberately finance the deficit. And if we're not doing that, then that's exactly what it's trying to do. But what we're not trying to do is to correct, if you like, a historic error which has gone on in the system, whereby we carry this on and so on. It's not been funded. and the money has been injected into the system. And what the president is trying to do is to say, look, okay, let's go back and begin to correct this. Let's go and issue bonds. And then begin to now, like, the way it should be done, begin to earn money to correct this. So it's an error that we've carried along, and something that has been with us for a long time. And the president is trying to say, look, let's try and see if we can correct this. That's exactly what it is. So, but there's lots of misunderstanding about this, in the system. I have somebody saying there's no law that talks about ways and means. So it's like saying there's no law that says government should be borrowed, and that's like a specific form of borrowing from the central bank. So you don't need any law. Once you approve the budget and you have your deficit, and the fiscal authorities tell you how they want to fund that deficit, and you allow them, to go ahead and do it. Once you give that approval, then they are looking for money, to keep to what you've approved. So that's exactly what it is. So I think that a lot of confusion, and we should really begin to have sessions, maybe in the new dispensation, whereby we come in and educate our lawmakers. I think that they need to know. There are lots of things that go wrong with the budget. For instance, the fact that each time the budget goes into the National Assembly, it is hiked up. It's wrong. It should not be done. They can reduce it, but they should not hike up the thing, because the person that is in charge, you are going to hike it, and you are adjusting rates of some of the assumptions that they made. You take the price of the barrel that's put in the budget, and you can increase it to get some accommodation and so on.
Okay, Dr. Chizia, just before you talk about the finance bill, I'd like to quickly follow up with this. You say it's just, the printing of Naira notes, that's the Ways and Means request, to augment government spending. But isn't this what the governor of Edo State has always been talking about in the last year or two, and drawing attention of the government to the implications of on the Naira note and on the economy, and on the growing debt burden of the federal government?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's been saying. But I've also taken a position that it's better to do that. Can you imagine if you don't pay salaries? I mean, he complains that they go to finance PAC, and they come back with monies, and it's all printed money and so on. Now, if he, as a governor, comes back and not pay salaries, what is going to happen? We should ask him, how is he going to run the state? So I think exactly what is happening is that, so you print the money, and you put money in the hands of people, and you buy some time, you buy some peace. I know exactly what has happened. So you put it in context. At that point in time, the government, the fiscal authorities didn't have much of a chance. They didn't have any alternative but to do what they did. So it was money printing, yes. But you printed money, and the implication it has is that it stokes up the rate of inflation within the system. But people have the illusion, they have the money, and so they can buy things, buy goods and services. Go and try, not putting monies in their hands, and this is what will happen to you.
But Dr. Chizia,
yes.
This conversation has been on for the past 2 years. So if you say government is buying time, the most plausible explanation to this is that it has not devised ways and means on the other hand of shoring up its revenue, such that an increase in the value of the Naira, such that it doesn't have to resort to ways and means, to raise revenue to fund, critical needs in the state's economy.
Yes, you're quite correct. That's exactly what has happened. We know that crisis you had is crisis of management, leadership and management. And so, yes, what you said is correct. But then what then do you do if you take, for instance, let's take the revenue from the petroleum we sell. No, you have it's been stolen. So nobody does anything about it, and that implies from what revenue that comes from that source. And so you have it, and then you have other sources where you could be able to make ends and money, but you're not earning it, and that's why this election that's coming. Better be shine our eyes, because we really have to move back to production, and they are saying it. What's happened? What has killed this economy is that we spent our time, struggling to share a shrinking cake. That has been the issue. So we need to move to where we are producing. You see vast areas of land and so on, and yet we cannot produce things, we cannot export, we're not exporting. And also want to make eggs without, want to make omelette without breaking eggs. So that has been the challenge. So yes, you're correct. And there are also other things within the system. Then the petroleum subsidy has not by default been deregulated now. I'm in Asaba here, even to buy my fuel and get it when there was a queue. I had to call Gabriel, the owner of Rain Oil, to give me a note. And they were running over the place looking for me to buy fuel. I'm like, well, how much did I buy? 225. Some people are saying even 370. It's been deregulated, and I would say they should do this, and the union will come up in arms and say, no, don't do it. People will go on strike. They're going to impoverish our people. Well, that's the way to go. Now, if you didn't do that this Christmas, there'll be crisis everywhere.
Well, Dr. Chizie.
Okay, there are queues. Yes.
Right. Pardon me. I mean, we can always talk about this, especially when we had the opportunity to do this about 10 years ago, but there was vehement opposition, even from this current government and all of that. But still on the ways and means, because I think this presents an opportunity to clear it out for Nigerians to understand this. Well, the CBN Act speaks of advances to government in terms of the CBN helping the government, giving it advances. But the certain guidelines of the CBN specifically mentions ways and means, but that's a CBN guideline for 2022. But when you look at this, Dr. Chizie, as at last year, it was 17.4 trillion naira, and I'm talking 2021. Now, this year, ways and means alone has increased by 5.3 trillion naira to 22.7 trillion naira. In fact, the president himself said it in the letter he wrote to the Senate. And, you know, looking through the CBN's website, you see some of the points CBN made about the ways and means and all of that, saying that the direct consequence of the central bank financing of deficits are distortions or surges in monetary base leading to adverse effect on domestic prices and exchange rates. Goes on to say, that is macroeconomic instability because of excess liquidity that has been injected into the economy. So you say, well, I mean, you don't have a choice. Buy time, pay salaries. But at the expense of this, or I mean, this is exactly what will happen. Do you think it's still a wise path to follow?
Well, I keep on saying that when it happened, we didn't have much of an alternative. You know, I just explained that fully. What is obvious, what all the economists know, what almost everybody knows in Nigeria, is that those regulations and stipulations in the CBN Act that says accommodation should be up to within this limit and so on, based on what it was last year, it's all been kept in the breach. You know, so we don't have that discipline in our environment. Sometimes because we've not managed our affairs very well, things have gotten so badly, so much out of hand that you know, it's very difficult to manage. If you want to keep to, you know, what the law says, you better be doing it. You better have the discipline and be doing it. But not when the thing is gone massively out of hand, that then you are now, you know, begin to say you're going to pay. We know the central bank has given money to the government beyond what central bank should give the government. But also, I said to people, in this environment, you have to look at the powers of the central bank governor, vis-a-vis of the president. Central bank government, the government to some extent, is handicapped, you know, in our environment. So they must have a central bank governor that has such a clout that we're able to, you know, look the president on the face and say you cannot do this. More so when such requests have, you know, lots of political implications and consequences. And so those are the challenges I think that we have to come up with. We need to clean up our act, and it's not something we can do overnight. It's not that we have to resolve. You know, we hope the election 2023 will deliver results we expect, and so that we begin to change the narrative, begin to do things the way they should be done. But it's not something that will happen overnight. It's not like a switch. You don't just turn it on and you get the light. But that is the process. It's going to be. It's not a dash, but it's going to be a walk. It's going to be a very long walk.
So, Dr. Chizie, let's now return to the finance bill. Of course, you've talked about it aiding government expenditure, but speak to the concern I raised earlier about the implications on additional tax payment of Nigerians. We read today that Nigerians will now have to pay more for calls, for data. Yeah, that's besides all of the other taxes that Nigerians have been burdened with, you know, and the other, you know, payments that put pressure on the already lean purchasing power of Nigerians.
Let me tell you, I have news for you. If you look at the ratio of revenue to GDP, tax revenue to GDP, within the sub-region, we have about the lowest. You know, if you take the VAT that we talked about now, the rate at which you pay, 7.5% is about the lowest within the sub-region. In some places, it's like 20%. So I think that the thing is that, you have this trust deficit. I think that, if you pay money, you want to see evidence that you paid money. So you have problems instead that you are being taxed, and you are not seeing the benefits of taxation. So you are being taxed, and you are still generating your power. As I speak to you now, I'm on generator. I'm generating my power. I have to get my water and so on and so forth. Why am I paying that money? But if you don't pay that money, then government doesn't get that money, and then it has expenditures to carry, and then it goes borrowing like it has been going through, and then it gets to a stage where even the borrowing, even happy lenders who are willing to lend. What is saving Nigeria? What I've been in the situation of Ghana today is just because we have some resources which we are still able to serve, and we're such a large economy. So so people tend to they're careful with us. But look at what's happening in Accra today, and see what the issues are having. They're going to now go into an engagement with IMF. Now, all because of these issues, of course, there are environmental factors that are contributed to this in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, COVID, and so on. They all contribute. So that it's not something that is, restricted, to us per se. So that's the thing. So we have to be patient and know that, yes, things have gone wrong, but then what we try to aim for and what we pray for is that we have to commence the process of getting us on the right track. And that should be our prayer.
Dr. Chizia, besides, providing a framework to ensure proper planning and execution of government expenditure, are you optimistic that this finance bill would in any way provide engendered transparency in government expenditure? I ask because, at the initial stage when the 2023 budget was first passed, recall that the Senate President raised some concern about some gray areas discovered in the budget. And that was hurriedly, resolved. And the Senate has talked about it in hushed tones. We don't know what these gray areas are. Are you concerned about, this lack of transparency in the whole budgeting process? Every year we have budget tell us about, some additional, items included in the budget. So are you optimistic that it will provide, engender transparency in the whole budgeting process?
Well, I think that you can't fight corruption. When you have corruption within the system, like you have it in Nigeria, it's not David Cameron that says we are fantastically corrupt nation. I'm not buying that anyway. But when you have corruption to the extent that you have in Nigeria today, there are other people around the place who try to do things, and some of them don't do it imaginatively. So you're trying to do something, and you say to yourself, what if I'm caught? So where does that leave me? So some of these criminals, they do things, they have one track mind. But the finance bill, all it does for you is what? I meet you, like I said earlier on. So like you said, courts and so on is being increased. Somebody could go to court tomorrow. Somebody, concerned citizen goes to court and say government has no right to hike up the rate of charges on calls, tax on calls, whatever it is. What the bill does for you, it gives the government the backing, the power to be able to implement those, to ask for those charges. And so they'll do it. But then, of course, if you collect the monies and so on, whatever you do with it is up to you. It's up to you to go back to your system and make sure that we have to embrace automation. That's what you are about. So you have to automate, and make sure that we remove as much as possible human interventions in the process. Now, the extent we're able to do that, then we're able to be able to make sure that the revenues that accrue are going to be diligently accounted for. So that's what's important. So there's no linkage.
Right.
No linkage. There's no direct linkage. But finance bill and showing fidelity and bringing good values and so on, stable, and making sure that money don't have leakages. There's no leakage.
Okay, Dr. Chizia, let's wind down. We have just less than a minute to finish up on this one. And yes, we're talking about the budget of the federal government, 21.8 trillion naira. But then we have subnationals. We have governors who have also presented their budgets, worked in that as well. And I'd like you to end on that note. We're entering a new year. There's always attention on the federal government. But do you see an interplay, really, maybe purposefully or otherwise, between the budget of the states and the federal government, such that this development is not just done at the federal level, but also at the subnational levels?
You know, my worry about the states is that the state governors are just too powerful. You know, so the state assemblies are in their pocket, and so the rigor probably you might get at this National Assembly. I don't think that they've been that fair, but they'll try and so on and so forth. But there's one that the president has pushed to the National Assembly has not been passed. And so you can imagine what goes on in the states. And so, at the states, the governor is a lot of the man now, he calls the shots and so on. And so, but let's begin to have this discipline entrenched. I want to see a situation whereby some rigor is applied, some thinking is applied, and then some due diligence is applied. And then the follow-up process, the oversight functions are followed. But what you get is that the budget is sent to a House of Assembly, and they're looking for how they would add some money to it, how to make sure that consultancy projects are going to be funded, which they themselves are going to implement. And so,
all right.
So I think that there are lots of things we have to correct, and I hope that the begin to do that.
After all, we have an opportunity to do that in the new year. But we'd like to thank you so much for your time. In spite of the holidays, you join us. Dr. Boniface Chizia is an economist joining us from Asaba in Delta State. Thank you once again.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.